Hello, America. It's election season, and that means everyone is trying to get you to vote for their guy. We're getting bombarded with messages all the time, including some that may not be entirely truthful. So, how can we keep a clear thinking process through all this noise to make good voting choices that are consistent with our values? I might not have all the right answers, but here's how I think about this. First, let's talk about the problem and why this is important. It's election season. There's lots of powerful people and groups on both sides that have a lot to gain or lose depending on who's elected. Corporations, the media, foreign adversaries, and of course politicians. Your vote is valuable to all of them, and right now they're in a last-ditch effort to use whatever resources and techniques they have to get you to vote for their guy. These attempts to influence you come in a lot of different forms. For example, they use fake users on social media to shape discussion by reinforcing talking points and drowning out other opinions. Another example, they directly broadcast political rallies on the news. That's not news. The only purpose of a rally is to reinforce a candidate's campaign message. There's no new informational value. The only reason to give a rally extended coverage is influence. You see it on Fox News almost every night, and I'm sure if Joe Biden was having rallies, and if I watched CNN, I'm sure I'd see it on there too. Damaging information about a candidate suddenly comes out of the woodwork. Now, some of this is fair. In some cases, information just might not be that relevant until we're deciding whether or not to give that person more power. But if someone has incriminating evidence, like embarrassing footage or incriminating emails, and they just decide to come forward with it in the last months of an election, or if it never came up when that person was already in a position of power, that's designed to influence you. It could still be valid or important criticism, but at least recognize that the people who chose when to release that information care more about influencing you for the candidate than getting justice. Another great example is worst-case scenarioing. Every candidate says, if the other guy wins, America will be destroyed, our freedoms will be taken away, and everybody's going to die. There are obviously better and worse choices in an election that will impact the lives of citizens, sure. But on the whole, our country survived Obama, we survived Trump, plus or minus 200,000 people, and overall, we'll survive whoever wins next. Trump isn't going to kill 20 million people by privatizing healthcare, and Joe Biden isn't going to force us all to get gay married to Antifa rioters. So those are just some examples. Doesn't matter how smart or strong-willed you are, nobody's immune to this stuff. You're bombarded with these messages and tactics every time you watch TV, every time you log on to social media, even every time you interact with someone else who this stuff has already influenced. It's all designed that way. And look, I'm not talking about some crazy George Soros or Koch brothers conspiracy. It's just that anyone who has a lot of resources and goals is going to use those resources to get those goals. It just makes sense for them. And there's been a ton of investment from the most powerful guys in the world to figure out how to influence everyone, including you, as much as possible without you realizing it. The more you think it doesn't apply to you, the more vulnerable you probably are, and that's exactly who they target the most. So how do we defend against it? How do we really know who to vote for? The first thing is to recognize that they're trying to decide what's important for us, and we need to take that back. We don't decide what the news covers, or what politicians give speeches about, or really even what comes across our news feeds on social media. The media decides what the top headlines are. Politicians write their speeches to focus on their strong points and distort information about their opponents. And algorithms, influenced by other users and organizations, decide what social media content goes in our newsfeed every morning. So when we're constantly being fed information and impressions of what other people want us to think are important, it can get hard to remember what truly is important. An example on the conservative side. Anyone remember the migrant caravan? That was billed as the main threat for conservatives in the 2018 midterm election. Trump literally declared a national emergency. There was a troop surge to the southern border. Every pundit kept screaming that it was a foreign invasion. By the time the caravan got to the US-Mexico border at Tijuana, there were 1,500 people in it. On an average day, that border crossing processes 25,000 pedestrians. We catch about 500,000 illegal immigrants trying to come in through Mexico per year. So don't get me wrong, a couple thousand at once is certainly a spike, but not so huge that it needed months of lead-up coverage and real-time tracking in newsrooms. And after the midterms, you didn't hear a word about it. I'm all for strong border control. My point isn't about immigration or even against Fox News. It's just an example of how the media can focus on something to try and inflate its importance and confuse people's priorities for the sake of an upcoming election. You could say the same thing about a lot of liberal issues this cycle too. So how do we protect against this? Well, you need to really think about what your goals are for the country and the role you're electing. So ask yourself, which areas are most important to you, and what do you want to see happen in each of them? Is it more important that we get a leader who's a good role model and shows strong personal values? Or is it more important that you get judges filled or law enforcement policies that align with your goals? You need to decide that up front and not let other people decide for you. Now, once you're clear on your biggest priorities, we need to look at each candidate and judge whether they'll get America closer to or further from your most important goals. How we judge this can be based on a few different sources: what they've done in the past, what they say they want to do, their platforms and policy statements, and analyses or claims from other people that we trust. The hard part is getting any kind of neutral information about a candidate to judge that. All of our information comes through some kind of claims about that person, good or bad, from someone with an agenda. Donald Trump is trying to get reelected. He's going to say he's good for the economy. That's based on his track record. The claim that under his administration, the economy did really, really well. That's one claim. But with everyone trying to twist and spin things to benefit them, there are 6 questions that I try to ask myself about each claim to help cut through the noise. First, is it factually true? If it's not, then none of these other questions really matter. There should be some proof or corroboration, and that can be hard to get when people use anonymous or vague sources like the New York Times, or when Donald Trump says lots of people or doctors are saying. Second, is it the complete truth? When people call fake news, I think this is usually really what's going on. It's not an outright lie, but the media will skip context that totally changes your perception. For example, after Charlottesville, people said Trump was supporting neo-Nazis and racists for saying there were very fine people on both sides. But just seconds after he said that in the same conversation, he made sure he was clear about who he was referring to. He specifically said, "I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally." The media just ignores this part to hurt Trump. It's the same thing when conservative media claims Democrats and Joe Biden aren't condemning violence and looting during Black Lives Matter riots. They did plenty of times, but if the media just never shows it, most of the viewers will keep thinking it never happened, and they can keep up that narrative. Happens on both sides. Third, is it relevant to the argument or candidate? Even if there's a valid criticism, it may be irrelevant to the claim. Like, there are instances where Trump has legitimately been caught lying and criticized for it. I think that's fair. But I recall a friend defending him on those with, well, the media treats Donald Trump very unfairly. They're not fair to him, as some kind of justification. I think it's true. The media is out to get him, and they do treat him unfairly sometimes. But that doesn't justify something he does that's completely unrelated. Fourth, is it relevant to my priorities? There could be a valid, relevant criticism that doesn't impact the priorities I care about. For example, Donald Trump is not really a good person. He cheated on his wife, he made fun of POWs, he ran fraudulent charities and businesses. I'd never let him near my daughter with how he talks about women. But do you need to be a good person to accomplish the goals you want him to accomplish as president? And that depends on your priorities for the country. It's always better if they are, but if my bigger priorities are on the economy and national defense, then maybe having a Christian, morally upright leader isn't as big of a priority for me. Is it unique? Something might be wrong and relevant, but if everybody's doing it, that does make it harder for me to hold it against them. If Brett Kavanaugh was a big-time partier in college and drank illegally underage, I feel like that's not great for a Supreme Court justice who's supposed to follow the law and show restrained, clear-headed judgment, but not a big deal breaker. That's just a normal part of the culture he's in. If I'm being totally honest, even some degree of corruption doesn't bother me that much, like wealthy parents or politicians getting their kids cushy jobs with their connections. Of course, I prefer we had a strong meritocracy for everyone in this country, but frankly, I'm not going to make a huge deal of it if everybody in the world is doing it. Finally, is the other choice any better? Now, speaking of politicians' kids and cushy jobs, let's talk about Joe and Hunter Biden. There's a lot of stuff to unpack about this, but for now, let's just assume that the following is true. Joe Biden benefited financially from his son's business dealings with foreign entities and lied to the American people about it. Whether you believe it or not, let's just assume that's true for this. Well, that's definitely bad, right? But now we have to ask ourselves whether this is better, worse, or the same versus our other choice of candidates. I'm not going to decide whether it is better or worse, but I'm just going to point out some things that I think make the question at least worth asking. Donald Trump's children are very much involved in his administration as president and in running their private sector businesses that have large foreign interests. I haven't found any disclosures with any details of those. Don Jr. pursued and lied about seeking foreign intelligence on a political opponent to benefit his father's election at the Trump Tower meeting. And that's not an accusation, that's Don Jr.'s version of the story after he got caught lying about it the first time. So again, you can decide is that worse or better than the Bidens. You let me know down in the comments. But whichever side you're on, I think there's enough there on either side to honestly reflect on that question. So to wrap things up, Everyone and their grandmother is trying to hijack your brain during election season. To prevent it, keep in mind what your priorities are and evaluate any claims about a candidate by asking yourself, is it true? Is it the full context? Is it relevant to the argument, the candidate, and the priorities? How is this different from others, including my other options? If there's anything I missed, anything I'm wrong about, let me know down below. If you think there should be more of this type of conversation, don't forget to hit the like or subscribe buttons. That helps this channel grow, and it lets me know what type of content is useful. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.